Right, hello. So undoubtedly you have by now heard the news, same as me. Games Workshop finally making some kind of television, movie, series thing. It's going to be starring Henry Cavill. I have a feeling there's some other people that are going to be involved that we know in the community of 40k. And obviously this comes as Henry Cavill has been told he's not going to be Superman anymore. And I guess first I want to say a couple of things. One, I don't like to make these jumping on press release videos too much because generally there's no real information to discuss, it's all speculation. And it also means I've had to stop what I was doing today to kind of jump on this and talk about it because I'm working on a new video. It's one I'm sure you guys are going to like and it should be coming out very soon. And I actually had a plan, as I usually do, for this month of what I'm trying to get turned out, so this is just added to the things I got to do. Now the other thing is, in the past, as you know, there have been announcements that potentially a series was being worked on. There was potentially, we believe to be, an Eisenhorn series was supposed to be being made at some point. I never made any follow-up about it, but I had heard rumours from people that that did get canned a long time ago. A few people reached out to me and said, yeah, this project just got scrapped, and they didn't mention anything about it, but that was from ages and ages ago. Is that going to happen here? Probably not, because they've got some big names involved that they've announced out the gate. They're doing it with Amazon and so forth, and they've really announced this publicly right across the board, so I think this is a thing which is definitely going to happen. As per the post on Games Workshop's website, they got a little graphic-y thing here. Warhammer starring Henry Cavill. Surprise! Games Workshop Amazon Studios working to bring the Warhammer 40k universe to screens big and small alike. And it also notes that Henry Cavill is bringing his lore expertise to the mantle of executive producer. He's going to be a starring role. Amazon Studios secures first of its kind rights to Warhammer 40,000. Henry Cavill set to star, executive produce global franchise. And then it's got a bit of blurb about what 40k is, for people who don't know what 40k is, Warhammer Universe, expanding through Games Workshop's miniatures, source books, etc. And then it just goes into talking about who they're working with, etc, etc. They've got Andy Smiley from Games Workshop, Max Bottrill, Roy Lee, Natalie Viscuso. Isn't that Cavill's girlfriend, I believe? Henry Cavill, numerous projects, doing Highlander soon, Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and The Witcher. Cool, cool. Amazon Studios, Games Workshop. So that's the press release spiel. Otherwise, in terms of what do we know, basically nothing. We have no idea when this is going to be set in 40k. We have obviously no idea of what it's going to deal with. Is it going to be Space Marines, Imperial Guard, Heresy, Modern M41? No idea at all about any of those things. One thing though that very obviously people are thinking about is, what does this mean for the 40k franchise? And for me personally, again, you just got to look, of course, at just the current state of things. I don't want to get too heavily into the state of the world, but let's just say we all are well aware, seemingly as ever, people have just as much disagreement about fictional content as they do about the real world, and as passionately and often as aggressively. And I think there's a couple of things to be sort of said on that, and there's a few producers that I watch on YouTube who I really enjoy. Maybe some of you know Moist Critical, big fan of his videos, but one of the things that he was talking about recently was just kind of being sick of people who just really hate on stuff for the sake of it, but similarly people who just kiss ass for the sake of it as well, and that there isn't, you know, so much of this kind of middle ground. Just like in everything these days, there's people who will just hate on stuff straight out the gate just for the sake of it, you know, and then on top of that you've then got people who will they will never allow any criticism of their thing that they love and that they praise and they worship, and nothing can ever be wrong, and that every break and every courtesy must be given to the producers. You know, oh, they haven't had enough time, they're just starting to work it through, they're going to fix it down the line, they're going to make changes, blah blah blah. You know, it's one or the other, as is everything in the world today, and that, quite honestly, is just mentally exhausting. What I enjoy doing is exploring fictional verses, thinking about the interesting stories, thinking about the details within those fictional verses, and that's really where we're at. But if we want to, for a minute, think more specifically about a 40k franchise in the global media world, because that's the thing. Until now, 40k has been largely contained within this niche. I still sometimes am confused how it is managed to stay within this niche for so long, but it has. It's kind of this thing where a lot of people obviously getting into 40k more and more and more in the past years, but somehow it's still kind of off of the radar, which I always find a really strange thing. I even saw, because I was checking an interview the other day with Rahul Kohli, and he was talking about how he likes Star Wars. He's a big fan of Star Wars, like so many people were. But now they're kind of realizing, hey, there's this other thing. There's this Warhammer thing, and it's way, way better. And I'm seeing and hearing that a lot, and I think for obvious reasons. One being that Warhammer just has a bigger, more broader, more interesting story with a lot of different directions you can go and a lot of characters, and it's just more brutal and visceral all throughout. But at the same time, Warhammer has a lot of problems for it when you want to expand it to a wider audience. One of those things obviously being the grim darkness and the brutality and how horrific it is. And one big question, of course, that people have asked forever is how on earth is Games Workshop going to translate that to a larger, broader audience? Because, for example, I remember when Squid Game came out. When Squid Game came out, and I saw these mainstream journalists going, "Oh my god, it's so horrific! Oh, it's unbearable! It's nightmarish! It made me feel sick! It's just beyond anything." And I went into Squid Game thinking, "Holy shit, this is going to be like some hostile levels of horror, you know, really graphic stuff." And then I was like, "Oh no, it's just like an average film. It's just completely normal level of social commentary." Horror, I guess, but not really. So I was kind of stunned. I was like, oh no, it's nothing at all like how they're talking about it. And I think that's the difference between people that are interested, invested in a fictional world which has horror elements to it, and perhaps the kind of more mainstream of things. And we've seen this forever with video games. There's this constant need, this want to dilute things and make it appeal to the broadest audience possible. Because of course, the more niche you make something, the less of an audience it's going to have, the less money you can make. The broader, the more diluted you make something, the less kind of visceral, aggressive horror that you put in, you're going to be able to sell it to more people. This is why, for example, in Star Wars, when somebody with a lightsaber cuts someone in half, their body doesn't spray out everywhere with blood and gore going all over the place. Obviously, you can talk about the fact that it would cauterize and seal them, etc. But you know what I mean? You know, they're not, when they're using lightsabers, they're not bisecting people and literally very visually nightmarish. Whereas if you look at, for example, the Space Marine 2 trailer, where they're coming up against the Tyranids and they are literally like carving them in half with a chainsaw. The Space Marine 2 trailer was one of those things where I was like, oh, okay, no, they are still keeping in the very visceral, bloody nightmare of it all. But it raises questions. It raises questions when you look at some fan animations that were done, how graphic and you know, believably graphic they were in terms of the 40k verse. When we think about the 40k verse and we think about the horrors that are within there, we're talking about graphic stuff. For example, in Darktide, you can literally smash someone's face off and see underneath. You can take away the front of their torso and see all their internal organs. Is that going to be in this new 40k franchise, this new visual franchise, or is it going to be more 12A or whatever the US equivalent is? Is it going to be for older children? Is that where they're going to aim at? Or are they going to go all in, 18 only, R-rated, Paul Verhoeven, David Cronenberg? Are they going full insane blood, slaughter, gore, grimdark? And I think a lot of people are going to expect that. I think a lot of fans are going to expect that very visceral level of things. I don't think that's to suggest that you need to out and out be gratuitous about it in an unnecessary way. But if there is a situation where some action is warranted that has to align with the lore, then it needs to happen. For example, I always bring this up as something which stunned me. And this was in the 2012 Dredd movie, if it was 2012. But basically the Dredd movie with Carl Urban and Olivia Thirlby. And there was a point in that film where I was ready for the film to let me down. And it's where they have had an encounter with some criminals, and they've captured one guy who's left. And Judge Dredd sentences him to death on the spot for basically resisting arrest and trying to, you know, assault and shoot at the judges, the attempted murder of a judge. So the sentence is death. And Olivia Thirlby's character is obviously very hesitant because she's never executed a person on the spot before. And I was very ready for the film to weasel its way out of having to make that happen. Because this is the kind of thing which always happens in movies these days. The rule seems to be when someone's actively fighting you, no worries, but if it's a bit more ambiguous, if it's an execution, even if it's in the context of the characters and the story, it's too unpalatable. I was like, they're going to find some weird way to get around this, they're not going to be brutal about it, they're not going to stick to the law. And I was very surprised. They got the character of Anderson, and yeah, she executed that guy on the spot. And it blew me away a little bit. I was very ready for the film to fail at that point. And they didn't. They stuck with it. So I think there's going to be a lot of similar questions to a situation like that when it comes to a 40k franchise. There's going to be these inflection points, these moments where you're like, are they going to do this properly? Are they going to stick to the lore? Or are they going to find some way around it? Some explanation, some reason why that thing doesn't have to happen that way. I think another thing that people are very obviously concerned about overall is, are they going to stick to the lore? Because this is something which comes up in tons and tons of other interpretations of franchises where they're like, are they sticking to the lore or are they just kind of doing their own thing? Look at, for example, the car crash, which is the Star Trek franchise. When they started doing Picard and all this other stuff, and those series were, Picard, for example, as has been heavily talked about, not by me, of course, but if you were to look at, say, for example, Red Letter Media, classic, but tons of others. Picard, the series, it's as if the people who were making that just never watched the previous shows ever. The characters were so wildly off point. The decisions that were made, the narrative, the whole thing was just horrible. And a lot of people were very turned off from that. And I hear it and I see it all the time from people that there is a huge concern that if Games Workshop ever tries to do anything with a sort of TV series or a movie series, that's going to be an issue. That they're going to sort of be like, oh, you know what, we just kind of want to do our own thing. We want to kind of make our own mark. We want to make our own story. We don't want to follow this vast amount of background material to the letter that has been established for 30 years. We don't really want to follow that. We kind of want to do our own thing because it fits better with, just kind of how we feel, how we want to do it. My gut feeling, if you had to ask me, if you said, Luton, will you bet 20 quid on them sticking to the lore? I would say yes. For a couple of reasons. Andy Smiley's involved. He's the creative director for Games Workshop. He's been there for a long time. The guy is solid on his lore. He's solid on his application, the way in which 40k is executed and followed. I would like to think that they would fully understand that this is something which has to hit right the first time. Because this isn't just we're doing a movie, we're doing a TV series. This is the first thing they're putting out there. They have to get it right. Very, very difficult. So many things to balance, so many different opinions, so many people to keep happy, but they are going to have to try and thread that needle. And you got to remember that Games Workshop is not entirely like a lot of other companies when it comes to sort of licensing out their stuff. It's true that there are, for example, a lot of video games which are absolute shit that have just been pumped out for years and years, okay? There are other questionable decisions they have made. But there is one thing which they do tend to keep an incredibly tight rein on, and that is lore detail. Like, an incredibly tight rein on. So I personally don't have a huge concern about that side of things. And ultimately, we know so little that, time will tell. There's not a huge amount of point in really talking about that until it comes along. And then people can bitch and moan if something changes and they don't like it. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Because they have so much material to work with. That's the other thing. They don't really need to go off and write some wild, far-reaching story about something which doesn't exist in the verse. There is so much to work with. There is more to work with in the 40k franchise which already exists. The parameters and elements and characters and everything which exists in there already, that they don't need to go off on sort of wild personal tangents of storytelling. Get involved, for example, like script writers and authors and people who don't know anything about the 40k franchise. They have got a massive, huge swath of writers working for them already. It's not the same as some other verses and new series which have come along. I don't think it's going to go in that way, or at least there is this large part of me which hopes that it doesn't become this burning disaster. There is another issue which is a big problem for them, which is how complicated Warhammer is, Warhammer 40k. In very much the same way that Dune is a very, very complicated world. And this is an issue for sure, because one of the things which was very difficult is condensing that amount of information down for an audience who is brand new. For people that are heavily invested in a world, in a verse, of course you have certain expectations. And this is another issue, which is that they are going to have to balance those two things. So they have to make it accessible enough that they can bring in new people. That's the whole point of putting it up on this bigger platform, this huge stage for the world to see. They've got to make it accessible. They've got to make it appealing to people who are coming in. That's the whole reason why they're doing it. At the same time, they want to do fan service. They want to keep the core fan base happy at the same time. Balancing those two things is extremely difficult, perhaps more difficult now than ever in the past. So trying to choose an area of the 40k verse to focus in on is going to be extremely difficult. Not to mention the fact that another issue that often arises when it comes to 40k narratives is the issue of, do you go very narrow or do you go very broad? How many characters do you have involved? There isn't really a singular protagonist within the 40k verse. Often you follow different people's stories all over the place. It's not focused on one person, one individual, their story. And there are people who can really have a hard time grappling and engaging with a story if it doesn't have, this is the person, this is their story, this is what is going on. It could well be that they literally just do the standard blurb. You know, the Emperor's been on the throne for all these years, this is the Imperium, this is the state of humanity, bang, you're into the show, you're thrown in the deep end, you just work it out for yourself as you go along. I think I personally would advocate for that myself, rather than just being spoon-fed it. But it does come with problems, because there is a risk that people will become bored too quickly. It depends on how you pace the series, it depends on focus of the characters, and lots of other details. I think what's going to be more of something I need to sort of steel my stomach for is how diluted it may be. When something like this comes along, when it's the first thing that they're doing, you kind of need to steel your stomach for the fact that it might be dialed down a bit. It might not live up fully to your expectations. And that's of course just another thing that any fan base is guilty of, which is sort of overhyping things so that whatever is delivered can never meet your grandiose expectations, that you just build up in your mind, oh, it's going to be this, it's going to be this, or this is the story I want to see. I've always wanted to see this thing visualized. And then when they don't deliver it, it's a crushing blow. I think the best thing is to not overhype these kind of things. It's just to wait and see what they deliver. You can't please everybody all the time. Let's just wait and see what it is. And then I think lastly, there is of course the fact that within the 40k verse, there are very heavy themes which permeate all throughout it. It's a dark verse. This is not a good place. Humanity are not the good guys. There is not a happy band of rebels fighting back against the darkness of the Empire like in Star Wars. They don't have that going on. The Imperium is this nightmarish authoritarian regime which dominates the galaxy and crushes brutally any who oppose it. There's horrifying themes in 40k of genocide, vivisection, torture, indentured servitude, slavery, and just of course gore, brutality, pain, slaughter, misery. It's not a happy world. And of course the key thing when it comes to 40k is, which side of the coin are you looking at it from? Are you looking at it from the rose-tinted, propagandized Imperium with its gold, shining, hulking Custodes and Astartes leading the good fight out into the galaxy, the Imperium of mankind, the Emperor's domain? Humans are the only singular greatest force in the galaxy, and they will just execute and kill everything else because the Emperor and the Imperium believe that they are the only ones who should be running the galaxy, and that they can basically do anything they want no matter how horrific. You can see it from that point of view, or you can turn it around and see the nightmarish reality of the Imperium, the horror that is life under this brutal, suffocating regime. Any small attempts to push back against it are crushed brutally. Any civilization that ever hoped that they might have some sense of freedom, that they could just be left alone, they're not important, they're just out there somewhere, they don't want to get involved in the Imperium, they just want to have their nice lives on their world, it's not allowed. They must be destroyed or subjugated. And you could take any example for this. Look at what happened on Rothanon, look at what happened at Krieg. And let's not forget the Emperor's Custodes. Look at the horrifying atrocities that they have committed over time in the name of the Emperor. So it's going to be very difficult, very interesting to see how they frame this. Are they going to frame the Imperium as the good guys, or are they going to play around with that? Because I think if it isn't made clear that, yes, on the face of things, the Imperium tries to portray itself as this, not necessarily benevolent, but acting in the greater interests of everyone, but in actuality it's a complete horrifying dystopian apocalypse. And I always think Valdor Birth of the Imperium is a really good example for lots of different reasons. I think if you're not addressing that and playing with that, you're not going to convey to people really what 40k is all about. So it's going to be interesting to see whether that's something that they play with, because that kind of deliberate duality in terms of how do you see humanity in 40k, how do you see the Imperium, is very embedded into the narrative, and it's one of the core things that people are very interested in when it comes to the franchise. The key to understanding why people enjoy 40k is they enjoy that side of it. People enjoy looking at the bleak darkness and thinking, oh my god, this is horrifying. This is the worst thing imaginable. And people like that. That's what people like about 40k. It's somewhat like how people might say people enjoy to see sort of apocalypse porn, in the sense of something like the HBO series when they did Chernobyl. Chernobyl has been something which has been just in the kind of cultural consciousness for a long time, because obviously it was so bleak, so horrifying, so disastrous that it is almost beyond comprehension for a lot of people. And humans in general are just kind of morbidly obsessed with disasters. I don't think it's because people enjoy seeing the suffering of others in any way like that. I think it's because people project themselves into those situations and think, oh my god, if I was in that reality, if I was in that place, that time, how would it be? How would I feel? How would I deal with that situation? What would it be like? And of course, for many people, if it's a real world scenario, it's completely unknowable. But within the fiction of 40k, like all fiction, you're placing yourself into that world. And I think that is one of the key draws when it comes to 40k. I don't think people who, generally speaking, enjoy 40k really want to see things get better, because I don't think that's why people are attracted to and then stay with the 40k verse in the first place. They don't want to see some kind of rebellion from like a Star Wars point of view. They don't want to see the kind of the good parts of humanity come back, because that's not what 40k is about. It's kind of completely missing the point. It's not about can humans exist in another way within this world, within this galaxy. Because we know they probably do. We know that there are probably planets out there that are just off the radar from the Imperium. We know that there are planets and worlds out there that are probably moderately like our world today. They probably have more freedom, the people there probably have more rights, they're more independent in their lives, but that's something that's just happening out there in the galaxy. We know that these things can exist, but that's not what 40k is about. If we took the guardrails off and just allowed this thing to just spin out exponentially, where would we end up? And I think that's really what 40k is. It's that morbid curiosity of like, wow, how insane is this getting? Like, what kind of mad thing? It's about really that kind of indulgence of the human imagination. How far, how bad can it be? How much can we push this? How nightmarish, how painful, how torturous, how just horrific it can be. And sometimes, of course, that means things get taken to a ridiculous degree, an absurdity. But generally, I think people are okay with that. They're fine with it. I mean, if we want to go deeper, 40k is really about looking at humans in humanity, the human condition. It's about looking at all those kind of dark aspects. That's why chaos is the reflection of humanity and all that kind of stuff going on there. That's way too much to talk about today. But basically what I'm saying is the bleakness, the harrowing reality for humans in the Imperium in M41, that's what people want. They want the misery, the dystopia. So if they try and go off and do something else, or if people suggest like, oh, this is an opportunity to try and bring good back and blah, blah. No, that's not what 40k is about. It's about the horror. Simultaneously balanced against, of course, the glorious, iconic vision of the Imperial Astartes, the Emperor's holy servants, the ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, the caricatures of the Inquisition, the mad things that they have going on in the world, like penitent engines, titans, of course, the Mechanicus, the ideology of the Imperial Guard, the different factions of the Imperial Guard, and on and on and on and on. But for as insane and over the top, and that's the other thing, I've made videos about this before talking about 40k, for as ridiculous and over the top about 40k is, and people say, oh, that's not realistic, it's stupid, it's so silly because it's so extreme, everything in 40k is so extreme. Yeah, that's what people like. People like the insanity. People like the fact of someone charging across a battlefield with a chainsaw sword slashing through heretics and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. There's a lot of things which could go right. Truly, we're going to have to wait and see. I'm going to keep an open mind. I'm going to be optimistic. because why would I not be optimistic? Why would I actively want to see something like this crash and burn? You know, why would I want that? I want this to be everything I would imagine it to be. I want it to be paced correctly. I don't want it to be some arcadey, crazy, fun and games thing all over the place. I don't want it to be a bloody superhero franchise. I want it to be bleak, slow. I want it to have deep narrative that deals with difficult questions about morality, ideology, the human condition. I want to have all those things set in the world of 40k. I want it to have probably some Xenos going on, some characters there. I would like it to stay within the lines of the lore, but maybe lean in on some little details and stories for things that we haven't heard about before. You know, just some little bits and pieces in there. And there's a lot that can happen here. We're going to have to wait and see. Please tell me your thoughts down below. I also know this isn't the kind of usual video I do. I think you can perhaps appreciate that I needed to make this video. I don't plan on going out of my way to make these kind of videos with any huge regularity, but nonetheless, welcome your comments as always down below. Thanks for watching, guys. We will talk about this again down the line as and when I have something to discuss. Hope you have a great Christmas. A couple of videos coming up soon. Please watch them. See you next time.